The coffee cup shattered against the concrete platform, spraying espresso across my white sneakers. My stepfather's hand connected with my jaw before I could process what was happening. The world tilted sideways as my shoulder slammed into the metal pole marking the MAX station entrance. Above me, the electronic board flickered, blue line arriving in 2 minutes. Around us, the evening commuters of Portland's Pioneer Square station froze mid-step, their faces forming identical expressions of shock quickly replaced by the careful blankness of people who didn't want to get involved. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Greg's voice cut through the ringing in my ears, low and dangerous in that particular tone I'd learned to fear at 12 years old. Don't you dare walk away from me, Claire. Your mother is talking to you. My mother stood 3 feet behind him, her Macy's name tag still pinned to her cardigan, her purse clutched against her chest like a shield. Her eyes met mine for half a second before darting away, and when she spoke, her voice barely rose above the ambient noise of the transit mall. We wouldn't have to do this in public if you just answered our calls. You're being dramatic. I touched my face, tasting copper where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. A businessman in a gray suit had his phone raised, maybe recording, maybe just pretending to check his messages. A teenage girl in a Roosevelt High jacket whispered something to her friend, both of them backing toward the opposite platform. An elderly woman with a canvas shopping bag looked like she wanted to intervene but stood paralyzed by uncertainty. And then there was the transit officer. He stood near the ticket validator, his TriMet uniform crisp despite the May heat, his hand resting on his radio. Something about the way he held himself perfectly still made him more noticeable than if he'd been moving. His face showed nothing, but his eyes tracked every micro-movement Greg made with the intensity of someone reading a language most people couldn't see. My name is Claire Martinez, and 24 hours before my stepfather hit me in front of 24 witnesses at Portland's busiest transit hub, I thought I'd built a life he couldn't touch. At 28, I had an apartment in the Pearl District with exposed brick and industrial windows. I had a career designing user interfaces for Intel's campus in Hillsborough, work that made sense in a way my family never had. I had a routine built around farmers markets on Saturdays and runs along the waterfront park on Sunday mornings. I had exactly 17 miles between my renovated loft and the small house in Gresham where I'd grown up, and I'd convinced myself that distance was the same thing as freedom. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon while I was debugging a navigation flow for a new tablet interface. My mother's number appeared on my phone screen, and I watched it ring 4 times before muscle memory older than my professional success made me answer. Claire, we need to talk. No greeting, no small talk, just the flat statement that had preceded every horrible conversation of my adolescence. I'm at work, Mom. Can this wait until? No, it can't wait. Tomorrow. Pioneer Square Station. 5:30. Why can't we just? Because I'm not discussing this over the phone where anyone could hear. Her voice carried that particular brittle quality that meant Greg was listening, coaching her words. You owe us that much. After everything we've done for you. The line went dead before I could argue, leaving me staring at my computer screen where a cheerful error message informed me I'd created a navigation loop that would trap users in an endless cycle. The irony wasn't lost on me. I should have ignored the summons. I should have blocked the number and gone to my evening yoga class and pretended I'd never heard my mother's voice. But 2 decades of conditioning don't evaporate just because you've moved to the trendy part of town and learned to order pour-over coffee with the correct terminology. At 5:15 the next day, I saved my work, told my team lead I was leaving early for a dentist appointment, and caught the blue line from El Monica station back toward downtown. The MAX train was packed with the usual commuter chaos. Intel employees heading home or into the city for happy hour. Portland State students with overstuffed backpacks. Tourists consulting their phones and arguing about which stop to take for Powell's books. I stood near the door, watching the landscape shift from the tech corridors of Hillsborough through the dense urban fabric of inner Portland. Each familiar station felt like moving backward through time, getting closer to the version of myself I'd worked so hard to leave behind. They were already waiting when I emerged onto the platform at Pioneer Square. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, her retail manager uniform making her seem both official and diminished. The gray she'd been fighting with drugstore dye had finally won across her temples. She stood with her arms crossed, defensive before I'd said a word. Greg filled the space beside her the way he'd always filled spaces, with the kind of bulk that came from former athleticism surrendered to beer and resentment. His Trailblazers cap was pulled low, but I could see his jaw working like he was chewing something bitter. His work boots were scuffed but clean, the costume of a contractor who hadn't worked a job in 4 years. "You're late," he said, though the station clock showed 5:28. "I'm exactly on time." "What's this about?" My mother glanced at Greg, waiting for permission to speak. "Can we at least go somewhere more private?" "There's a coffee shop." "No." I stayed near the platform edge, keeping the crowd around us. Some instinct I'd learned to trust told me that whatever they wanted, I needed witnesses for it. "Just tell me what's so urgent that you had to ambush me during rush hour." Greg's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Ambush. That's nice. Your mother tries to have a conversation with her only daughter, and it's an ambush. What do you want?" $12,000. The number landed between us like something physical. Around us, the platform continued its rush hour rhythm. The max warning bell chimed. Someone's phone played a snippet of a pop song before being silenced. A street performer 2 blocks away worked through a slightly off-key version of a Beatles song. $12,000, I repeated. "For what?" "That's family business," Greg cut in before my mother could answer. "You don't need to know the details. You just need to help out the people who raised you." Something hot and familiar rose in my chest, the same feeling I'd spent years learning to suppress. "You didn't raise me. You moved into our house when I was 11 and made everyone miserable." His face flushed the particular shade of red I'd learned to recognize as a warning sign. "Watch your mouth. I've been supporting your mother for 15 years while you've been off playing tech professional, too good to visit, too busy to help out when we're struggling." "Supporting her with what money?" "Mom's the one with the job. Mom's the one who pays for everything while you sit in front of the TV pretending you're waiting for the next big construction contract." I saw his hand move before my conscious mind processed the motion. 15 years of hypervigilance made my body react even as my brain lagged behind. I flinched backward, but there wasn't enough room. His palm caught my cheek with enough force to snap my head sideways. My coffee, forgotten in my hand, flew sideways and exploded against the concrete. Then I was falling, or being pushed, my shoulder hitting the metal pole hard enough to send electric pain down my arm. The platform went quiet in that horrible way that meant everyone had seen everything. I grabbed the pole to keep from going down completely, tasting blood, feeling the familiar disconnect between my body and the moment, like watching myself from somewhere outside my own skin. My mother was beside me instantly, but not to help. Her fingers dug into my elbow, her face close to mine, her voice a harsh whisper. "Stop making a scene. People are staring. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" I looked up at her, at the woman who'd given birth to me, who'd read me bedtime stories when my father was alive, who'd held my hand during thunderstorms. She was looking at me like I'd done something wrong by having a face that Greg's hand had connected with. "Ma'am, I need you to step back." The voice came from behind my mother, calm and official and carrying the weight of authority. The transit officer had crossed the platform while everyone else maintained their careful distance. Up close, he was older than I'd first thought, maybe mid-40s, with silver threading through dark hair and lines around his eyes that suggested either chronic worry or a life spent squinting into the sun. His nameplate read Officer M. Webb. "This is a family matter," Greg started, but the officer's raised hand cut him off. "Sir, I observed you strike this woman. That's assault, regardless of your relationship." His eyes moved to me, and something in his expression shifted, just for a second, before the professional mask returned. "Miss, are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" I should have said yes. I should have let him call an ambulance, make a report, start the documentation that would matter later. Instead, I heard myself say what I'd said 1,000 times before. I'm fine. It was just a misunderstanding. The officer held my gaze for a long moment, and I had the strangest feeling that he knew exactly what words I was about to say before I said them. Is that really what you want to tell me? Greg moved closer, inserting himself between us. See? She's fine. No harm done. We're just having a family discussion that got a little heated. Happens to everyone. Step back, sir. The officer's voice hadn't gotten louder, but something in it made Greg actually comply. Miss, you're bleeding. At minimum, you need to get that looked at. I touched my lip, and my fingers came away red. The Max warning bell chimed again. My mother was crying now, quiet tears that she'd perfected over the years, the kind that made her the victim of whatever scene was unfolding. Officer Webb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small packet of tissues, offering them to me with one hand while his other unclipped something from his belt. A business card. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He pressed it into my palm along with the tissues, his hand briefly covering mine. When you're ready to stop calling it a misunderstanding, he said quietly, you call that number. Doesn't matter what time. Doesn't matter how long it takes you to be ready. That number reaches me directly. Greg was already pulling my mother away, muttering about missed appointments and wasted time. My mother looked back once, her face a mixture of pleading and resentment, wanting me to fix whatever I'd just broken by bleeding in public. The blue line pulled into the station with a hydraulic hiss, and the crowd that had been watching from a safe distance suddenly remembered they had places to be. They flooded toward the train doors, flowing around me like water around a stone. In seconds, the platform was nearly empty except for me and Officer Webb. Are you sure you're okay? He asked, and this time his professional tone had cracks in it, something almost desperate underneath. I looked down at the card in my hand. TriMet Transit Police. Officer Marcus Webb. A phone number written in pen on the back, along with 3 words that made my hand start shaking. I remember everything. Who are you? I whispered. He glanced around the platform, then back at me, and I saw 20 years of grief and guilt and hope flash across his face before he locked it down again. Someone who should have protected you a long time ago. Someone who's not going to make that mistake again. The train doors closed. The Max pulled away, heading east toward Gresham, probably toward the house where my mother and Greg would spend the evening rewriting what had just happened into a story where I was the problem. Officer Webb stayed with me until I stopped shaking enough to walk, until I promised to at least think about calling the number, until I got on the next westbound train heading back toward my apartment and my carefully constructed life that had just revealed itself as tissue paper. I made it home before the shock wore off and the pain set in. I made it through my front door and all the way to my bathroom before I finally looked in the mirror and saw what everyone at Pioneer Square Station had seen. The split lip. The darkening bruise along my jaw. The wild look in my eyes that I recognized from every other time Greg had decided I needed to be reminded of my place. But this time, something was different. This time, there had been a witness who didn't look away. This time, I had a business card with a phone number and a promise. This time, the transit officer who'd seen everything had looked at me like he knew me, like he'd been waiting years for this exact moment. I set the card on my bathroom counter and stared at those 3 words until they blurred. I remember everything. What did that mean? Remember what? Remember who? My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. We need that money by Friday. Don't force Greg to come find you. I deleted the message. Then I picked up Officer Webb's card, pulled out my phone, and stared at the number for a long time. Tomorrow was Thursday. Friday was the deadline. 28 years of being my mother's daughter, Greg's problem, the girl who learned to lie about bruises and broken bones. But tonight, I was just a woman with a split lip and a stranger's business card and the first spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Not hope, exactly. Something harder and sharper than hope. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow I'd decide if I was brave enough to make that call. Tonight, I'd just try to remember how to breathe. The business card sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days, propped against the coffee maker where I'd see it every morning. Officer Marcus Webb. The name meant nothing to me, but those 3 words on the back kept pulling my thoughts away from design mock-ups and stakeholder meetings. I remember everything. Thursday passed in a fog of work emails and concerned glances from my team lead who noticed the bruise I'd tried to cover with concealer. Friday came and went with 7 missed calls from my mother's number and 2 from numbers I didn't recognize, probably Greg using borrowed phones. I let them all go to voicemail, deleted them without listening, and told myself I was fine. Saturday morning, I stood in my kitchen with coffee growing cold in my hands, staring at that card like it might explode. My phone buzzed with another text. This one was different. We're done being patient. Greg knows where you work. Don't make him drive out to Hillsborough. Something crystallized in my chest, sharp and cold. For 15 years, I'd been running from the fear Greg cultivated so carefully. The implicit threats. The reminders that he knew where I lived, where I worked, that distance meant nothing if he decided to close it. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to be small enough, quiet enough, successful enough to either appease him or escape his notice entirely. And here I was at 28, still flinching at phantom sounds, still calculating exit routes, still letting him live rent-free in the space between my thoughts. I picked up the card and dialed before I could talk myself out of it. He answered on the second ring. Officer Webb. It's Claire Martinez. From Pioneer Square. Wednesday evening. My voice came out steadier than I felt. A pause, then an exhale that sounded like he'd been holding his breath for days. Claire. Thank you for calling. Are you somewhere safe right now? I'm at my apartment. They're threatening to show up at my work if I don't give them money by today. How much are they asking for? $12,000. They won't say what it's for, just that it's family business and I owe them. Another pause, longer this time. Claire, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer. Do you actually owe them anything? Money you borrowed, expenses they covered for your education, anything legitimate? I thought about the years after my father died. My mother working retail, struggling to keep the mortgage paid on the Gresham house. The life insurance money my father had left, $50,000 that my mother told me went to paying off debts and funeral expenses. The years of Greg's arrival when suddenly we had a big screen television and season tickets to Trailblazers games while my mother claimed we were too broke to afford my class field trip fees. No. My father left money in a trust for my education. It's the only reason I could afford Portland State. Everything else, I worked for. They didn't contribute anything except making my teenage years a nightmare I'm still recovering from. The trust fund. Do they know about it? My mother always knew. The trust documents were in my father's papers. But it was locked until I turned 18, and by then I was already out of the house. I never told them how much it was worth or that there was anything left after tuition. How much is left, Claire? I hesitated, years of financial privacy warring with the instinct that this man somehow needed to know. Around $95,000. I've kept it invested conservatively. It's my safety net. And they want $12,000, which would open the door to asking for more. His voice had shifted from concerned stranger to something else, something tactical. Claire, I need you to meet me. Not at a police station, not officially. Not yet. There's a coffee shop on Southeast Hawthorne, Morning Light Roasters. Can you be there in an hour? Why not the police station? If this is official, because before we make this official, you need to know who I really am. And I need to show you some things I've been holding onto for a very long time. The coffee shop was exactly the kind of Portland establishment I'd grown comfortable in over the years. Recycled wood furniture, local art on the walls, a chalkboard menu featuring single-origin beans with tasting notes. Officer Webb was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table wearing civilian clothes, jeans, and a flannel shirt that made him look less like law enforcement and more like someone's uncle. Which, I was about to learn, wasn't far from the truth. He stood when he saw me, and that's when I noticed it. The shape of his face. The set of his eyes. The way his mouth pulled to one side when he was thinking. I'd seen those features before, in photographs kept in a shoebox under my bed, images of a man who died when I was 7 years old. You look like my father, I said, stopping 3 feet from the table. I should. Daniel was my older brother. He gestured to the chair across from him. My name isn't Marcus Webb. It's Marco Martinez. I'm your Uncle Marco, though I doubt you remember me. You were pretty young when your mother cut me out of your life. I sat down slowly, my mind racing through fragmented memories. A man who brought me comic books. Someone who let me win at checkers and didn't talk down to me like other adults. An argument in the backyard, raised voices, my mother crying, and then he was gone, and when I asked about him, I was told he'd moved away and didn't want to stay in touch. I remember you, I whispered. You had a motorcycle. You taught me how to draw. A Kawasaki Ninja, forest green. And you were always drawing, even then. Your dad used to say you saw the world in shapes and colors the rest of us missed. He pulled a worn manila folder from the bag beside his chair. Claire, I need to show you some things, and they're going to be hard to see. But I need you to understand that I never stopped watching out for you, even after your mother threatened me with a restraining order if I ever contacted you again. The folder contained photographs. Me at 14 with a fading bruise on my wrist. Me at 15, the school photo where I was wearing a turtleneck in September because the marks on my neck wouldn't fade. Police reports I'd never known existed, calls to the Gresham house for domestic disturbances, each one marked with my mother's statement that everything was fine, just neighbors overreacting. I tried to intervene, Marco said quietly. When Greg first came around and I saw how he treated you, how your mother changed around him. I told her he was dangerous. I said I'd help her, that she didn't need him, that Daniel would have wanted better for both of you. She chose him anyway. Told me I was jealous, that I'd never understood what it was like to be a single parent, that if I ever came near you again she'd file for a restraining order and make sure I never worked in law enforcement again. So you changed your name and became a transit cop. I couldn't stop being your uncle, but I could stop being someone she could easily track and block. Marcus Webb could work for TriMet. Marcus Webb could ride the MAX lines and keep an eye on routes between Gresham and downtown. Marcus Webb could be there, watching, waiting for the day when you might need someone to witness the truth. I looked at the photographs again, evidence of violence I'd spent years minimizing and excusing. How did you get these? Some I took myself, before she cut me off. Others came from school counselors who suspected but couldn't prove anything. A few from emergency room visits where the stories didn't quite add up. I'd been building a file for 14 years, Claire. Hoping I'd never need it, knowing someday I probably would. Why didn't you do something? Report it officially? Pain flickered across his face. I tried. I filed reports. But your mother's good at lying, and you were good at backing up her stories. Greg's smart enough to never leave marks that couldn't be explained as accidents. And the system is designed to keep families together, even when that family is slowly destroying a kid. By the time I realized legal channels weren't going to work, your mother had already made good on her threat. I had a choice between staying in your life illegally, which would have made things worse for you, or playing the long game. I chose to wait. To watch. To collect evidence for the day you were ready to fight back. I thought about Wednesday evening, the way he'd been standing exactly where he needed to see everything, the timing that seemed almost too perfect. You knew they were going to meet me at Pioneer Square. I monitor police scanners. Your mother called Gresham PD last week, trying to report you as a missing person when you wouldn't return her calls. The officer told her you were an adult and no report could be filed. But the call was logged, including her complaint that you were refusing to help family in a time of need. I put it together that they'd try to ambush you somewhere public, somewhere you couldn't ignore them. Pioneer Square is the biggest transit hub in the system. I made sure I was assigned there for evening rush hour every day this week. You've been following me for 14 years. I've been protecting you from a distance for 14 years. There's a difference. He pulled out another document, this one more official looking. Greg Holbrook, real name Gregory Michael Hollister, has 2 prior domestic violence convictions in Nevada. Restraining orders from 2 ex-girlfriends. A pattern of financial abuse and control. He finds women with resources, usually single mothers, moves in, takes over their finances, and bleeds them dry before moving to the next mark. Your mother is his longest con yet. The paper showed a mugshot from 10 years ago, Greg with less gray in his hair but the same means set to his mouth. Details of arrests, short jail sentences, probation violations. A man who hurt women professionally and had refined his technique over decades. Why hasn't anyone stopped him? Because his victims are too scared or too ashamed to press charges. Because the system treats domestic violence as a private matter until someone ends up dead. Because men like Greg are good at finding the cracks to slip through. Marco met my eyes. But this time is different. This time he assaulted you in front of 24 witnesses at one of the busiest transit stations in Portland. This time there's security footage from 3 different angles. This time his victim is an educated professional with resources and an uncle who's been documenting his pattern for years. This time, we can make charges stick. I stared at the photograph of Greg, this man who'd stolen my teenage years and was still trying to steal my future. What do I need to do? First, you don't give them any money. Not a cent. That $12,000 is probably to cover gambling debts or credit card minimums. Whatever it is, giving it to them will only delay the inevitable and give them leverage to ask for more. Second, we file a police report about Wednesday's assault. I'm a witness with no conflict of interest, Officer Marcus Webb, who happened to observe a crime. We keep my real identity separate for now. Third, we run a credit check and financial audit. I'd bet my pension that Greg's been using your information for more than just emotional leverage. You think he's stolen my identity? I think men like him don't stop at asking. They take what they want and worry about consequences only if they get caught. My phone buzzed on the table. Another text from my mother. Last chance, Claire. Greg's leaving for Hillsborough in 20 minutes. Don't do this to us. I showed the screen to Marco. He read it and his jaw tightened. Empty threat. Greg's not going to make a scene at a major tech campus with security and cameras everywhere. He operates on fear and implied violence, not public spectacles. But we should move quickly anyway. Are you willing to file a report today? I thought about the girl in those photographs, the one who'd learned to lie so smoothly about injuries and accidents. I thought about the trust fund my father had left me, money meant to build a future that Greg wanted to steal. I thought about 28 years of being afraid and another 50 or 60 years stretching ahead, and whether I wanted to spend them looking over my shoulder. Yes, I said. Let's do this. Marco's hand covered mine briefly, a gesture that felt like absolution for years of absence. Your father would be proud of you. He was brave too, but he was also kind. He taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. Tell me about him. My memories are so scattered, just pieces. He was a carpenter, worked construction, but he was really an artist. Everything he built had these little details nobody else would notice. Secret compartments in furniture. Patterns in the woodwork. He said beauty should be hidden where only the people who really looked would find it. Marco smiled, distant with memory. He built a swing set in your backyard when you were 4. Did your mother keep it? She told me she sold it when we moved. But we'd never moved. The house in Gresham was still the same house. Another lie, another piece of my father erased. We'll find out what's left, Marco said. After we deal with Greg. After we make sure you're safe. Then we'll see about recovering the pieces of your dad that your mother tried to hide. We spent another hour in that coffee shop, Marco walking me through what would happen next. The police report, the investigation, the likely charges. He had a lawyer's number ready, a woman named Jennifer Nakamura who specialized in family law and domestic violence cases. He had a forensic accountant on standby to audit my credit. He'd built an entire infrastructure of support, waiting for the day I'd be ready to use it. Why? I asked finally. You could have moved on, started your own family, lived your own life. Why spend 14 years watching over someone who didn't even know you existed? Because you're family, Claire. Daniel's daughter. And because I failed you once when I let your mother chase me away. I wasn't going to fail you twice. He packed up his folder of evidence, all those years of careful documentation. I made your father a promise at his funeral. Told him I'd look after his girls, make sure you were okay. I kept half that promise. Your mother made her own choices, and I can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. But you've been trying to save yourself since you were 18. I'm just making sure you don't have to do it alone anymore. We walked out into the late morning sunlight, Portland's overcast sky finally breaking into something clear. My phone buzzed again. Another text, this one from an unknown number. You're making a big mistake. Family is supposed to help family. I showed it to Marco. He photographed it with his own phone, already building the case. Document everything. Every call, every text, every threat. They're scared now, which means they'll get sloppy. What if they come to my apartment? Then you call me, and you call 911. You don't open the door, you don't engage. Let them make mistakes on camera. Your building has security, right? Doorman and key card access. Good. Talk to your building manager today. Show them the police report once we file it. Make sure they know Greg Holbrook is not to be allowed in under any circumstances. Put his picture on file. We walked toward his truck, an older Ford Ranger that looked exactly like the kind of vehicle a transit cop would drive on days off. Before I got into my own car, he stopped me. Claire, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Greg's going to escalate. Your mother's going to call you crying, blaming you, saying you're destroying the family. You might lose her entirely. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the woman at Pioneer Square who'd grabbed my arm and told me to stop making a scene while blood ran down my chin. The woman who'd chosen Greg over her own daughter repeatedly for 15 years. The woman who'd cut off my uncle for trying to protect me. I think I lost her a long time ago, I said. I just didn't want to admit it. Marco nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then let's make sure you don't lose yourself in the process. Let's go file that report. The Portland Police Bureau's Central Precinct smelled like burnt coffee and institutional cleaning products. Marco walked me through the front entrance like he'd done it 1,000 times, nodding to the desk sergeant who buzzed us through without question. Detective Sarah Brennan met us in a small interview room painted the particular shade of beige that seemed universal to government buildings. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes that cataloged everything about me in the first 3 seconds. Ms. Martinez, I'm Detective Brennan with the Financial Crimes Unit. Officer Webb indicated you've experienced both assault and potential identity fraud. Let's start with Wednesday evening and work our way through everything systematically. She set a digital recorder on the table between us. This will be recorded. Take your time. Details matter. I walked her through the Pioneer Square incident, trying to keep my voice steady when I described the impact, the coffee exploding across concrete, my mother's hiss about embarrassment. Marco sat quietly beside me, his presence steadying even though he couldn't hold my hand or show any connection beyond concerned witness. Detective Brennan took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally asking clarifying questions that felt designed to trip me up until I realized she was actually building a timeline that would hold up in court. The security footage corroborates your statement, she said after I finished. We pulled it yesterday after Officer Webb filed his initial report. 3 cameras caught the incident from different angles. We can clearly see Mr. Holbrook strike you, see you impact the pole, see your mother restrain you afterward. The video also shows approximately 18 witnesses with clear line of sight, 4 of whom were recording on cell phones. This is one of the most documented assaults I've handled in years. Something loosened in my chest. Proof. Not just my word against theirs, not just my uncle's testimony that could be dismissed as family bias, but objective evidence that couldn't be explained away or minimized. What happens now? I asked. We issue a warrant for Gregory Holbrook's arrest on assault charges. Given the public nature of the incident and the clear video evidence, the DA will likely prosecute even if you have second thoughts, though your cooperation makes everything stronger. The assault charge is just the beginning though. Officer Webb mentioned concerns about financial crimes. I explained about the $12,000 demand, the trust fund, the years of Greg living off my mother's income while claiming to run a construction business. Detective Brennan's expression didn't change, but her pen moved faster across the legal pad. When's the last time you checked your credit report? Maybe 6 months ago. Everything looked normal. I'd like to run a comprehensive check right now with your permission. We have tools that go deeper than consumer reports. They show inquiries, applications, accounts that might be in collections but haven't hit the major bureaus yet. She pulled a form across the table. Sign here authorizing the search. Whatever we find stays confidential unless it becomes evidence in a prosecution. I signed, trying to ignore the tremor in my hand. Detective Brennan typed on her laptop for several minutes, her face carefully neutral in that way that meant she was seeing something significant. Finally she turned the screen toward me. Ms. Martinez, do you have a credit card with First National Bank? No. I use a Visa through my credit union and one Amex for work expenses. According to this, you opened a First National card 18 months ago. Current balance is $8,300. Mostly cash advances and balance transfers. My stomach dropped. I never opened that account. Do you have a car loan with Westside Auto Finance? No. I bought my Subaru used, paid cash. You financed a Ford F-250 pickup through them 2 years ago. Original loan amount $42,000. Current balance with missed payments and fees is $48,000. The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thin. That's not possible. How could someone open accounts in my name without me knowing? Your mother would have access to your social security number, date of birth, previous addresses. If she and Mr. Holbrook worked together, he could have provided fake pay stubs and employment verification. Some lenders don't verify information thoroughly, especially for applicants with good credit scores. What was your score the last time you checked? 745. I've always been careful about my credit. Detective Brennan made a note. It's currently 590. The missed payments and high utilization have destroyed it. There's more. A personal loan through an online lender, $6,000. A furniture store credit line, maxed out at $4,000. Utility accounts in your name at an address in East Portland I'm guessing you've never lived at. She kept scrolling, kept listing accounts and debts that had been created in my name, purchases I'd never made, cash I'd never seen. By the time she finished, the total was over $70,000. $70,000 stolen using my identity while I'd been carefully building my career and my savings, thinking I'd escaped. This is why they want the $12,000, I said, the pieces clicking into place. They've maxed out everything they can access. They need cash to make minimum payments or the whole house of cards collapses. That's my assessment as well, Detective Brennan agreed. The good news is this is prosecutable fraud. The bad news is recovering from identity theft is a lengthy process. You'll need to file police reports for each fraudulent account, dispute every item with credit bureaus, potentially sue creditors who won't remove the debts. It could take years to fully clean up. But I didn't do this. How am I responsible for debts someone else created? You're not, legally. But the burden of proof is on you to demonstrate fraud. It's backwards and it's unfair, but that's the system. This is where having solid evidence of a pattern helps. She pulled up another screen. I ran Gregory Holbrook through our database. Did you know he has prior identity theft convictions in Nevada? Marco leaned forward, his professional mask slipping slightly. I found the domestic violence history but not financial crimes. Different name. He was Gregory Hollister when he was convicted of fraud in Las Vegas 8 years ago. Stole his girlfriend's identity, opened accounts, bought a boat and 2 ATVs before she caught on. He served 9 months, was released on probation, and apparently learned to be more careful about using different names in different states. The manila folder Marco had shown me earlier suddenly felt like the tip of an iceberg. How many women had Greg done this to? How many times had he refined his technique, learned from mistakes, gotten better at covering his tracks? There's more, Detective Brennan continued. Your mother, Donna Martinez, opened 3 of these accounts. We can trace the IP addresses on the applications to her workplace computer at Macy's. She's not just enabling him. She's actively participating. That hurt worse than the physical assault somehow. My mother, who'd raised me alone after my father died, who'd taught me to read and braided my hair for school pictures, had been systematically stealing from me for years. Not out of desperation or coercion, but as a willing participant in Greg's long con. I'd like to bring them both in for questioning, Detective Brennan said. Mr. Holbrook for assault and identity theft. Your mother for fraud and conspiracy. But I need to know if you're prepared to see this through. If you're going to back out when she calls crying, or if you're going to cave when they promise to get help and change. I need to know now. Because once we arrest them, once this becomes public, there's no putting it back in the box. I thought about Wednesday evening, about blood on my white sneakers and strangers looking away. I thought about spreadsheets showing debts I'd never agreed to, purchases made in my name for a life I'd never lived. I thought about my father, who'd left me money meant to build a future, money that Greg and my mother had tried to access and, failing that, had simply stolen in another form. My father died when I was 7, I said quietly. Construction accident, a fall that shouldn't have killed him but did because the safety equipment was faulty. My mother got a settlement, life insurance, enough to be comfortable if she'd been careful. By the time I was 12 and Greg showed up, all that money was gone. She told me it went to medical bills and the mortgage, that we were barely surviving. But somehow there was always money for his truck, his tools, his season tickets to basketball games. Detective Brennan nodded, encouraging me to continue. When I left for college, my mother told me I was selfish. Said I was abandoning her when she needed me most. But the truth is, I was escaping. I worked 30 hours a week on top of full course loads because I was terrified of being dependent on them for anything. I ate ramen for dinner most nights my first 2 years because I refused to come home for a free meal if it meant sitting at that table with him. My voice was shaking now, but I pushed through. I built a life. A good life. And the whole time I'd been patting myself on the back for getting out, they'd been stealing from me anyway. Using my name and my credit like I was a renewable resource they could tap whenever they needed cash. So no, detective, I'm not going to back out. I'm not going to cave. I want them prosecuted for everything you can prove they did. All right then. Detective Brennan closed her laptop. We'll issue warrants this afternoon. Given the assault charge and the risk of flight, Mr. Holbrook has connections in multiple states. We'll pick them both up at the earliest opportunity. That might be tonight or tomorrow depending on where they are. I'll need you to be available for additional questions as we build the case. And Ms. Martinez, I strongly recommend you speak with a lawyer about the civil aspects. You'll want to sue to clear these debts and possibly pursue damages. Marco pulled out another business card. Jennifer Nakamura. She's expecting your call. She's handled cases like this before and she's good. One more thing, Detective Brennan said. Change your passwords on everything. Bank accounts, email, social media, work login, everything. Use a password manager and make them all unique. Put fraud alerts on your credit files with all 3 bureaus. Consider a credit freeze. Lock down every possible avenue they might use to access your information or impersonate you. What if they come to my apartment? What if Greg shows up at my work? You call 911 immediately and then you call me. She handed me her own card with a direct number written on the back. Don't try to handle it yourself. Don't let them in. Don't agree to meet them somewhere private. These situations escalate, especially when the abuser realizes they're losing control. Everything we've discussed today suggests Mr. Holbrook is facing serious prison time. That makes him dangerous in a different way than he was before. We wrapped up the interview after another hour of detailed questions about my mother's access to my personal information, about Greg's behavior patterns, about financial transactions I could remember that seemed suspicious in hindsight. Marco walked me out to the parking lot where my Subaru sat in visitor parking. The afternoon sun was startlingly bright after the fluorescent gloom of the police station. "How are you holding up?" Marco asked. "I don't know yet. Ask me tomorrow when it's real." I unlocked my car but didn't get in. "Thank you. For keeping track of everything, for being there Wednesday, for not giving up on me even when my mother tried to erase you from my life. That's what family does. The real kind, not the kind that shares DNA and calls it obligation." He squeezed my shoulder briefly. "Go home. Lock your doors. Call that lawyer. And Claire, don't check your email or answer unknown numbers until we've got them in custody. Anything they say or send right now is either manipulation or evidence, and you don't need to deal with the first while we're collecting the second." I drove home through the kind of Portland traffic that usually made me curse but today barely registered. My mind was spinning through the implications of everything Detective Brennan had shown me. $70,000 of debt. Years of careful financial planning destroyed by people who were supposed to love me. The thought of my mother sitting at her computer during lunch breaks at Macy's, typing in my social security number and date of birth, creating accounts in my name while I sent her birthday cards and felt guilty for not calling more often. My building's doorman greeted me with his usual smile that faltered when he saw my face. "Ms. Martinez, are you all right?" "Jerry, I need to talk to building management about updating my security. There's a man who might try to access my apartment. He shouldn't be allowed in the building under any circumstances." Jerry's expression shifted to professional concern. "We'll handle that right now. Come with me." An hour later, I had Greg's photo and description on file with building security, instructions that no one was to be allowed to my floor without my explicit advance approval, and a promise that any attempted breach would result in immediate police involvement. I climbed the stairs to my third-floor apartment, suddenly paranoid about enclosed spaces like elevators, and locked my door behind me with both the deadbolt and chain. My apartment felt different, contaminated somehow by the knowledge that Greg and my mother had been violating my life from a distance while I'd been living in this space thinking I was safe. I changed every password I could think of, typing in random strings of letters and numbers until my fingers cramped. I called the 3 credit bureaus and set up fraud alerts. I left a voicemail for Jennifer Nakamura explaining what Detective Brennan had found. Then I sat on my couch in the gathering dusk and finally let myself feel the weight of it. Not just the assault, not just the fraud, but the years of gaslighting and manipulation that had convinced me the problem was my sensitivity, my inability to forget, my failure to be a good enough daughter. The realization that my mother had been stealing from me with the same hands that used to check my forehead for fevers and sign my permission slips. My phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message on speaker. "Claire, it's Mom. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to stop this right now. Greg didn't mean to hurt you. You provoked him by being disrespectful and refusing to help when your family needs you. If you talk to the police, you're going to destroy everything. Please, baby, just call me back. We can work this out like adults." I saved the voicemail and sent it to Detective Brennan's email. Evidence. Everything was evidence now. Every call, every text, every attempt to manipulate me into backing down was another nail in the case against them. Another text came through, this one from a number I didn't recognize but suspected was Greg using someone else's phone. "You're going to regret this. I've given 15 years to your mother and this is how her daughter treats me? You always were an ungrateful little brat. Remember that." I screenshot it and sent it to Detective Brennan. Then I blocked the number and turned my phone face down on the coffee table. The sun set over Portland, the city lights beginning to sparkle across the West Hills. Somewhere out there, Greg and my mother were panicking, realizing that I wasn't going to cave this time, that the careful structure of lies they'd built was beginning to collapse. Somewhere out there, Detective Brennan was drafting warrants and coordinating with patrol officers. Somewhere out there, Marco was probably worrying about me, checking his phone to see if I'd called for help. But in my apartment, in the space I'd built for myself with my own work and my father's carefully protected legacy, I sat in the growing darkness and felt something unexpected blooming in my chest. Not relief, not yet. Not quite hope. But something harder and sharper. Something that felt like power. The call came at 2 a.m. I jerked awake from uneasy dreams to see Marco's name on my phone screen, my heart already racing before I answered. They got him, Marco said without preamble. Portland police picked up Greg at a bar in Southeast about an hour ago. Tried to run, which added resisting arrest to his charges. Your mother turned herself in 20 minutes ago with a public defender. They're both being held until arraignment Monday morning. I sat up in bed, pulling my knees to my chest. Is it over? It's beginning. Get some sleep if you can. Brennan will want to talk to you again tomorrow, and you've got that appointment with the lawyer on Monday. He paused. Claire, your mother asked to see you. The duty officer said she was pretty hysterical, saying this is all a misunderstanding, that you're overreacting. You don't have to respond to that. I won't. The words came easier than I expected. Thanks for calling, Marco. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in my living room watching Portland's night sky slowly lighten to gray, drinking coffee and scrolling through my credit reports on my laptop. Each fraudulent account felt like a violation, an invasion of the life I'd built. The furniture store credit line had been used to buy a leather sectional and a 60-inch television, items I'd never owned, probably sitting in the Gresham house right now. The personal loan had been spent in cash advances, untraceable. The truck loan was for a vehicle Greg had been driving for 2 years while I took the Max to work, never knowing it was titled in my name. Sunday passed in a blur of documentation. I printed every credit report, every fraudulent account statement I could access online, every text message and voicemail from my mother and Greg. I filled a 3-inch binder with evidence of financial destruction, each page a small piece of the larger picture of systematic theft. Jennifer Nakamura called late afternoon to confirm our Monday meeting and to tell me she'd already been in touch with Detective Brennan. This is a strong case, she said, her voice crisp and professional. The video evidence of assault is unambiguous. The financial fraud has a clear paper trail. Your mother's IP address on multiple applications is going to be very difficult for her to explain away. We can file civil suits to clear the debts while the criminal cases proceed. I'll need you to be prepared for this to take months, possibly over a year until everything's resolved. What kind of sentences are we looking at? For Greg, with his prior convictions and the assault caught on video, probably 5 to 8 years if he takes a plea deal, potentially 10 to 15 if he goes to trial and loses. For your mother, as a first-time offender cooperating with a more experienced criminal, maybe 3 to 5 years. The DA will likely offer deals in exchange for testimony against each other. They'll turn on each other. People usually do when facing real consequences. Your mother will want to minimize her involvement, paint herself as a victim of Greg's manipulation. He'll try to shift blame to her. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. They were partners in this, whatever story they tell themselves. She paused. Claire, I need to ask. How do you feel about your mother potentially serving prison time? I thought about the woman who'd raised me, who'd been broken by my father's death and had chosen to stay broken rather than heal. Who'd brought Greg into our lives and then chosen him over me every single day for 15 years. Who'd sat at her computer and stolen my identity while I sent her Mother's Day cards. I feel like she made her choices, I said finally. And choices have consequences. Monday morning I called in sick to work, the first time I'd used sick leave in over a year. My manager was understanding, probably had been expecting it given the visible bruise still fading on my jaw. I met Jennifer Nakamura at her office in downtown Portland, a small suite in one of the older buildings near Pioneer Square. She was in her late 30s, wearing a sharp navy suit, her desk organized with the precision of someone who dealt in details that mattered. Let's start with the immediate issues, she said after we'd reviewed my documentation. We need to file disputes with every creditor, provide them with copies of the police reports and fraud affidavits. Most will remove the debts once they verify the fraud, but some will fight it. The truck loan is particularly problematic because the vehicle still exists and has value. We'll need to locate it and arrange for repossession. It's probably at my mother's house in Gresham. We'll coordinate with the lender and the police. If it's there, they can seize it as part of the criminal investigation. She made notes on her legal pad. The credit cards and personal loans should be straightforward to discharge. The utility accounts we can dispute directly with the providers. Your credit score will recover once the fraudulent items are removed, probably within 6 months to a year. What about damages? Can I sue them for what they've done? Absolutely. We can file a civil suit for identity theft, emotional distress, and financial damages. The criminal convictions will make the civil case much easier to prove. We can seek compensation for the time and money you'll spend fixing this, for the damage to your credit, for the emotional harm. Realistically, though, they probably don't have assets worth pursuing. Your mother's house is mortgaged. Greg has nothing in his own name. We might get a judgment but never collect on it. I don't care about collecting. I want them held accountable. Jennifer smiled slightly. Good. That's the right motivation. Now, there's something else we need to discuss. Your mother's house in Gresham. You said your father died when you were 7? Construction accident. My mother got a settlement and life insurance, maybe $200,000 total. That house is probably part of your father's estate. If he died without a will, or if the will left everything to your mother with you as a minor, the property should have been held in trust for you as well. At minimum, you might have a claim to a portion of the equity. We should pull the title records and see how it's been handled over the years. The thought of the Gresham house, that place where I'd spent my miserable teenage years, possibly being legally mine, felt surreal. She told me we almost lost it after he died. That she worked extra shifts to keep the mortgage paid. She may have lied about that too. Let me do some research. If there's equity there and you have a legal claim, we can leverage it in the civil suit. She pulled out another form. I also want to discuss protective orders. Given Greg's history of violence and his current charges, we can request a restraining order preventing him from contacting you or coming within a certain distance of your home and workplace. Your mother too, if you want. Yes. Both of them. We spent another hour going through paperwork, Jennifer explaining each form I needed to sign, each step in the process of unraveling 15 years of financial and emotional abuse. By the time I left her office, I had a stack of documents to fill out and a court date scheduled for the restraining order hearing. Detective Brennan called while I was walking back to my car. Ms. Martinez, we've completed the initial interviews with both suspects. I thought you'd want to know how they're playing this. Let me guess. My mother's claiming Greg forced her to do it. Close. She's saying she didn't know the accounts were fraudulent, that Greg told her he had your permission to use your information for joint family expenses. She's portraying herself as naive and manipulated. Greg, on the other hand, is claiming everything was your mother's idea and he barely knew about any of it. He says the truck was bought for family use with your implied consent since you're part of the household. I haven't lived in that house in 10 years. He's not being particularly believable. The prosecutor is offering both of them plea deals. Your mother would plead guilty to 3 counts of identity theft in exchange for testimony against Greg in a recommended sentence of 3 to 4 years. Greg's looking at assault, multiple counts of identity theft, and fraud. His deal would be 7 years minimum. Are they taking the deals? Your mother's lawyer is advising her to take it. Greg's fighting everything, claims he's being railroaded. There's an arraignment this afternoon at 2 if you want to attend. You don't have to, but you have the right to be there as the victim. I thought about sitting in a courtroom watching them in orange jumpsuits, facing consequences for the first time in their relationship. The idea held a certain appeal, a symmetry. They'd made me stand in front of them countless times to account for perceived failures. Maybe it was time to reverse the dynamic. I'll be there, I said. The Multnomah County Courthouse was busy with Monday afternoon proceedings, lawyers and defendants and family members crowding the hallways. Marco met me outside courtroom 4, back in his civilian clothes since he was attending as my uncle, not as an officer. You don't have to watch this, he said. We can get coffee and wait for the outcome. I need to see it. I need to see them standing in front of a judge answering for what they did. We found seats in the gallery. The courtroom was standard issue, wood paneling and fluorescent lights and the seal of Oregon mounted behind the judge's bench. Greg was brought in first, hands cuffed, wearing a jail jumpsuit that made him look smaller than he'd seemed on the Max platform. His eyes scanned the courtroom and landed on me, his expression twisting into something ugly before the bailiff directed him to face forward. My mother came next, also cuffed, her face blotchy from crying. She looked older than her 51 years, the stress of the weekend etched in deep lines around her mouth. When she saw me, she mouthed something that looked like, please, but I turned my attention to the judge entering the courtroom. Judge Patricia Howard was in her 60s, gray hair pulled back severely, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the case files. The arraignment was procedural, the charges read aloud, both defendants entering pleas of not guilty on advice of counsel. The prosecutor requested high bail given Greg's flight risk and prior record in other states. The public defenders argued for release on recognizance, claiming strong community ties and no risk of flight. Judge Howard looked unimpressed. Mr. Holbrook, I see you have prior convictions in Nevada for similar offenses. You failed to appear for court dates in 2 separate states. Bail is set at $75,000. She turned to my mother. Ms. Martinez, you have no prior record, but the allegations involve systematic fraud against your own daughter over multiple years. You're employed and have ties to the community, but the severity of the charges concerns me. Bail is set at $30,000. Neither of them had that kind of money. They'd be staying in jail until trial or until they accepted the plea deals. The realization seemed to hit my mother all at once. She started crying harder, saying something to her lawyer who shook his head in response. The judge set a preliminary hearing date for 2 weeks out and dismissed the court. As the bailiffs led Greg and my mother back through the side door to the holding cells, Greg turned and stared directly at me. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear but could read easily enough. This isn't over. Marco's hand on my arm was steady. Yes, it is. He just doesn't know it yet. We left the courthouse and walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, neither of us speaking until we were seated with overpriced lattes. Marco studied my face with concern. How are you doing? I don't know. I thought I'd feel something seeing them like that. Relief or satisfaction or vindication. But mostly I just feel tired. That's normal. This is the adrenaline crash after months of hypervigilance. Your body's been in fight or flight mode since Wednesday, probably longer. Now that the immediate threat is contained, you're feeling the aftermath. Detective Brennan said my mother might take a plea deal. That she'd testify against Greg to get a lighter sentence. Would that bother you? I considered it. No. I think I want her to tell the truth for once, even if her motivation is saving herself. Let it all come out in court. Let everyone see what they did. I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup, seeking its warmth. She asked to see me. At the jail. You don't owe her that. I know. But part of me wonders if she has anything to say that would make sense of this. Some explanation that would help me understand how she went from the mother who read me bedtime stories to the woman who stole my identity. Marco leaned back in his chair. I can tell you what happened to her, but you're not going to like it. Your mother was always fragile. Even when Daniel was alive, she relied on him completely for emotional stability, financial decisions, everything. When he died, she couldn't function alone. She needed someone to tell her what to do, how to feel, who to be. Greg showed up and filled that vacuum. He didn't force her to become someone she wasn't. He just gave permission for her to stop fighting her worst impulses. So everything she did, she chose to do. Yes. Greg might have suggested it, but she made the choice to type in your social security number. She made the choice to open accounts in your name. She made the choice to stand by while he hurt you for 15 years. And the hardest truth, Claire, is that she made those choices because they were easier than standing up to him or protecting you. I wanted to argue, to find some thread of explanation that would preserve something of the mother I remembered from childhood. But the evidence was overwhelming. The IP addresses from her work computer. The applications in her handwriting. The years of gaslighting and manipulation and choosing Greg over me every single time. I'm not going to see her, I said finally. Whatever she has to say, she can say it to her lawyer or to the prosecutor or to the judge. I'm done being her audience. Marco nodded approval. Good. That's healthy boundaries. My phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made my breath catch. Message from Portland Community Credit Union regarding suspicious activity on your account. I opened it with shaking hands, already knowing what I'd find. Someone had attempted to access my checking account using my online banking credentials. The attempt had been blocked by the fraud alert I'd placed, but the timestamp was from 30 minutes ago, while Greg and my mother were in court. They gave someone else my banking passwords, I said, showing Marco the email. Before they got arrested. Someone just tried to drain my checking account. Marco's expression hardened. Forward that to Detective Brennan right now. This shows premeditation and conspiracy with additional parties. Whoever they brought into this just became an accessory. I forwarded the email, then called my credit union to report the attempted breach and change all my security information. The representative was apologetic and efficient, walking me through additional security measures and confirming no funds had been accessed. After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone, processing the implications. Even arrested and facing serious charges, Greg and my mother had tried one last time to steal from me. They'd given my banking information to someone as a contingency plan, probably hoping to clean out my accounts before I could freeze them. How much worse is this going to get? I asked Marco. It's already gotten as bad as it's going to get. Now it's just cleanup and consequences. The criminal case proceeds. The civil case proceeds. You rebuild your credit and your life. They serve their time and hopefully learn something, though in my experience, people like Greg rarely change. And my mother? Your mother has a choice to make. She can take responsibility, serve her time, and maybe try to become someone better on the other side. Or she can spend the rest of her life blaming you for consequences she brought on herself. Either way, that's her path to walk, not yours. We finished our coffee and walked back to where I'd parked near the courthouse. The spring afternoon was warming up, Portland's cherry blossoms dropping pink petals across the sidewalks. Normal people going about normal days, unaware that in the courthouse behind us, two people were sitting in cells beginning to understand that their actions had finally caught up with them. Thank you, I told Marco before getting in my car. For everything. For waiting all these years. For being there when it mattered. That's what family does, he said, echoing his words from Saturday. The real kind. You call me if you need anything. And Claire, you should be proud of yourself. You did a brave thing this week. I drove back to my apartment feeling hollowed out but clean, like a wound that had finally been properly drained. The bruise on my jaw was fading to yellow-green, the visible evidence of assault nearly gone. But the invisible damage would take longer to heal, the years of conditioning and fear that couldn't be erased with a few days of legal proceedings. The email from Detective Brennan arrived 6 weeks later while I was reviewing wireframes at my desk in Hillsborough. Subject line: Case update and request for victim impact statement. I saved my work and opened it, my heart rate ticking up despite knowing the criminal proceedings were moving forward exactly as Jennifer had predicted. Greg had rejected the plea deal and demanded a trial. His public defender had apparently advised against it, but his ego wouldn't allow him to admit guilt. My mother had accepted her deal after 3 weeks of deliberation, agreeing to plead guilty to 4 counts of identity theft in exchange for a recommended sentence of 42 months and full cooperation against Greg. Her testimony would be the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. The trial was scheduled for late August, 3 months away. Detective Brennan was requesting I write a victim impact statement to be read at sentencing, assuming Greg was convicted. She'd attached a template and guidelines, clinical language about describing the harm caused and the ongoing impact on my life. I closed the email and stared out the window at Intel's manicured campus, tech workers moving between buildings with their badge lanyards and coffee cups. My life had found a strange new normal in the weeks since the arraignment. The fraud alerts on my credit had blocked 2 more attempted account openings, both traced back to associates of Greg's from his Nevada days. The truck had been recovered from the Gresham house and returned to the lender. Jennifer had filed civil suits against both Greg and my mother, motions moving through the courts with glacial patience. And I'd started seeing a therapist, finally, after years of telling myself I was handling things fine. Dr. Patricia Wong specialized in family trauma and had an office in the Pearl District 3 blocks from my apartment. Twice a week I sat in her calm space and unpacked decades of conditioning, slowly learning to recognize the difference between guilt that was mine and guilt that had been imposed on me. "You're allowed to feel relief," she'd told me in our last session. "You're allowed to feel anger. You're allowed to feel nothing at all. There's no right way to process watching your mother face consequences for choosing an abuser over her child." The victim impact statement took me 2 weeks to write. I went through 7 drafts, each one trying to capture the scope of damage without descending into bitterness. How do you explain to a judge that the worst harm wasn't the $70,000 in fraudulent debt, but the years of believing something was wrong with me for not tolerating abuse quietly? How do you quantify the cost of hypervigilance, of scanning every room for exits, of flinching at sudden movements even now? In the end, I kept it factual. The assault at Pioneer Square and its physical effects. The discovery of systematic identity theft spanning years. The destruction of carefully built credit. The ongoing therapy and legal fees and time spent repairing what they'd broken. I ended with a single line that felt true: I am rebuilding a life that should never have needed rebuilding, and I am doing it without them. Greg's trial lasted 4 days. I attended every session, sitting in the gallery with Marco beside me and Jennifer taking notes for the civil case. The prosecution was methodical, walking the jury through the video evidence of the assault, the timeline of fraudulent accounts, the pattern of abuse spanning multiple states and victims. Greg's other survivors testified, 3 women who'd lost homes and savings and years of their lives to his cons. My mother testified on the second day, her voice barely audible as she described how Greg had convinced her to open accounts in my name, how he'd promised they'd pay everything back before I found out, how it had spiraled beyond her control. She cried on the stand. She apologized to me directly, looking across the courtroom with red-rimmed eyes. "I know sorry isn't enough. I know I destroyed your trust and your credit and your faith in family. I was weak and I was scared and I chose the wrong person over the right one every single time. I hope someday you can forgive me, but I'll understand if you never do." I felt nothing watching her testimony. No anger, no sympathy, just a distant acknowledgement that she was telling a version of the truth filtered through her need to see herself as victim rather than accomplice. Dr. Wong had warned me about this, the way abusers and their enablers rewrite history to preserve their self-image. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Greg's face went red and then white as the forewoman read the verdict. He turned to stare at me one last time before the bailiffs led him away, and I met his eyes without flinching, without looking away, without the fear that had defined our relationship for 15 years. Sentencing happened 2 weeks later. The judge reviewed the victim impact statements, listened to Greg's lawyer make a half-hearted plea for leniency, and then delivered 12 years in prison with no possibility of early release. My mother was sentenced separately, receiving her agreed-upon 42 months at a minimum security facility, eligible for parole after serving 2/3 of her sentence. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited for statements. A local news crew had picked up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about identity theft and domestic violence. I declined to comment, letting the prosecutor speak about the importance of holding financial abusers accountable. Marco walked me to my car, his presence steady and uncomplicated. "Your dad would be proud," he said. "You stood up for yourself. You demanded accountability. That takes real courage." "I don't feel courageous. I feel exhausted. That's what courage feels like when the adrenaline wears off. Come on, I'm buying you dinner. You need to eat something that isn't coffee and stress." We went to a Thai restaurant in northwest Portland, sitting at a window table and ordering too much food. Marco told stories about my father, filling in gaps from my childhood memories with details that made him real again. How he'd built furniture in the garage on weekends, how he'd wanted to teach me woodworking when I was older, how he'd set up the trust fund specifically because he worried about my mother's judgment with money. He knew, I said. Even before he died, he knew she couldn't be trusted to protect me financially. He loved her, but he wasn't blind to her weaknesses. That's why he made the trust irrevocable, why he named an independent trustee. He was protecting you from her even then. 3 months after the sentencing, Jennifer called with news about the civil case. She'd negotiated a settlement agreement where my mother would sign over her interest in the Gresham house to me in exchange for dropping the emotional distress claims. The house had equity of about $60,000 after the mortgage was paid off, enough to cover my legal fees and some of the costs of credit repair. What am I supposed to do with that house? I asked. Sell it, rent it, burn it down ceremonially. It's yours to decide. I drove out to Gresham on a Saturday morning, parking in front of the small house where I'd spent my miserable teenage years. It looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling, the yard overgrown. I used the key the title company had provided and walked through rooms that felt haunted by the girl I'd been, the one who'd learned to be invisible and silent and careful. My father's workshop was still in the garage, his tools hanging on pegboard exactly where he'd left them 21 years ago. My mother had never touched them, preserving them like a shrine even as she'd erased every other trace of him from her life. I ran my fingers over his table saw, his hand planes, the half-finished projects that would never be completed. In the backyard, I found it. The swing set my father had built when I was 4, still standing despite decades of weather and neglect. The chains were rusted and the seats were cracked, but the structure itself was solid, built with his characteristic over-engineering and attention to detail. Hidden beauty that only someone who really looked would notice, just like Marco had described. I sat on the ground next to the swing set and cried for the first time since the Pioneer Square assault. Not tears of sadness or anger, but something cleaner. Grief for the father who'd tried to protect me from beyond the grave. Relief that the worst was finally over. Exhaustion from carrying fear for so long. And underneath it all, something fragile that might eventually grow into peace. I sold the house 3 months later to a young couple expecting their first child. They talked excitedly about renovation plans and good school districts and building a life there. I wished them well and didn't mention the ghosts they'd be painting over, the history absorbed into the walls. Some stories don't need to be told. The money from the sale went into investments, added to what remained of my father's trust fund. My credit score had climbed back to 700 and rising, the fraudulent accounts removed one by one through Jennifer's persistent work. I got promoted at Intel, my manager commenting on how focused I'd become after working through that difficult personal situation. Marco and I started having dinner every Sunday, a routine that felt like building the family I should have had all along. He brought his girlfriend Karen to meet me, a high school teacher with an easy laugh who treated me like the niece I'd always been. We talked about my father, about woodworking and trains and the small details of lives lived fully before they ended too soon. A year after the Pioneer Square assault, I stood on that same platform at evening rush hour. The Max pulled in right on schedule, commuters flowing around me in their purposeful trajectories. No one looked twice at me, no one remembered the incident that had changed everything. The station had absorbed that moment and moved on, indifferent to individual drama in its constant flow of humanity. I didn't get on the train. I just stood there feeling the weight of what I'd survived and what I'd chosen and what I'd become in the aftermath. The girl who'd learned to minimize abuse was gone. In her place stood someone harder and clearer, someone who understood that family is built through choice and presence, not biology and obligation. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Wong confirming our next appointment. Another from Jennifer with an update on the final civil settlement details. One from Marco asking if I wanted to bring anything to Sunday dinner. Normal life, built brick by brick from the rubble of what Greg and my mother had tried to destroy. The next train arrived and this time I boarded, heading home to my Pearl District apartment where no one could hurt me without consequences, where the locks were strong and the boundaries stronger. Outside the windows, Portland rolled past in the golden hour light, beautiful and indifferent and full of people carrying their own hidden stories of survival. I'd made it through. Not unscathed, but through. And that, I was learning, was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.